If you'd like a heartfelt rave review of Stephen Wilson's gig at the London Palladium on 20th of May this year, pop over to Jim Newstead's channel where you'll get exactly that. If, on the other hand, you can maybe cope with an equally genuine but somewhat more mixed response to the same performance, I'm afraid you're stuck with me. But do stick around as I unleash the terrible tale of the Prog coma setlist of doom. Hey, welcome to the channel with me, JSB. If you've seen my recent review of this, the overview, Stephen Wilson's latest prog epic, you'll know two things. One, I'm a long-time bigly fan of Mr. Wilson and love a lot of what he's done, including most of this. Not everything, as we shall see, but most of it, including parts of his career that others loathe. What you might not know is I have managed to see him multiple times in the past, a couple of times with Porcupine Tree, a couple of times solo, and all of those gigs were immense. At least a couple of them were rare full 10 out of 10s for me. I'm just prefacing all of that to say this one wasn't. For a number of reasons, which I'll get to, but I'm actually going to talk about the support act first. Now, I remember, and I haven't watched Friends in years, but there's an early episode where Ross says something when they're all talking about foreplay, and he says, "Oh, for guys, it's like the comedian you sit through before Pink Floyd come on. It's not that you don't like the comedian, but that's not why you bought the ticket." That's not a Ross impersonation, by the way. Anyway, two things. Ross, a Pink Floyd fan? Don't think so. And a comedian opening a prog show or any concert, that always stuck with me at the time because I'd literally never heard of such a thing and certainly never experienced it until now. So at the Palladium, possibly because of the history of the venue, there was a different comedian opening each of the 4 nights that Stephen played there. And I was lucky enough to get my favourite of the four, Frank Skinner. Now, I've been a Frank Skinner fan for probably a decade longer than I've been a Stephen Wilson fan. It's a long time, folks, but I'd never seen him other than on the telly. He only had about a 20-minute set and spent a lot of that taking the piss out of prog and prog audiences. In fact, he even said, there's guitar solos longer than this set. And he was talking about it in the show. So there were gags about the, shall we say, paucity of female audience members. And he'd actually been at one of the previous shows the week before, and he made several references to how damn long and self-indulgent it all was. And we all laughed along knowingly. Yes, of course it is. Except that by the end of the gig, I'd come around to the view that he maybe wasn't joking, although I'm still not really sure either way, to be honest. Anyway, I put it off long enough. Let's talk the gig itself. And it started, as expected, with all 2 tracks of the overview. So how did that stack up live? Well, both better and worse than on the album, as it turns out. Now, as I suspected with the atmosphere and the visuals, which were pretty stunning all night, it has to be said, the bits of the title track that I'm less keen on, like the first 5 minutes, worked much better. And as a whole, it was kind of full immersive experience, as you might have been led to believe. The other track, the opening track, Objects Outlive Us, which is my preferred track on the album, was good. But I had a couple of issues with the sound on this one. One was Stephen's falsetto, which is great, but it was loud, almost blew me head off when he did the opening lines. And then there was, not just unfortunately for this song, but all night, the drums. Now, I waxed lyrical about the drumming on this track on the album, but it hit me right away that something about the drum sound was off. And this is not about Craig Blundell as a player, he's fantastic. But the drums themselves sounded awful. Like he was bashing wet cardboard boxes. Thud, thud, is all I heard all night. And once you pick up on something like that, you then focus in on it, or I do, sadly, and you can't unhear it. So yeah, that was my first distraction. But all in all, they pulled off playing a very difficult album with the aplomb that you would expect of a bunch of seasoned musicians. So it wasn't too much of a surprise that we had an interval after that, which was good, as I got a chance to stand up and stretch. More on that in a bit too, I'm afraid. So after 20 minutes, they returned to the stage, and we got the first, for me at least, dud of the night, in the form of the title track of the previous album, The Harmony Codex, which I'm sorry, but I find horrifically dull and noodly, and not even good noodly like fresh udon with duck and hoisin sauce. Hmm. Oh, yeah. Anyway, I started to shift uncomfortably in my seat at this point, a theme I shall be returning to. But then, boom, luminol kicks in, and still awful drum sound notwithstanding, I was thinking, oh, this is more like it. Now things are cooking. We then had What Life Brings, which is another harmony codec track, but one I actually like, and a proper song. Um, Plus, we got another good prog gag out of Stephen with some good-natured booing at the announcement that he was going to play a song that was only 4 minutes long. A couple of really early Porcupine Tree tracks followed that I was unfamiliar with, so that was interesting enough. And then Pariah, oh, that's one of my faves. But what makes it so wonderful is the performance from Nanette Tayeb on vocals, and she wasn't there. I mean, she was on the screen, and her voice was heard, but essentially the lads were playing a backing track to her performance on screen, and it was still good, but I was watching the screen and her and not them, and it's like, maybe they should have just done something else. But, still a highlight. Mm. Now, I'm going to talk about this because something I contend with that I've never mentioned before on the channel, and generally don't talk about because I ain't looking for your pity, baby. I got problems, who doesn't, right? Nonetheless, to look at me, you'd think there's a bloke who sits down a lot and does it well, but you'd be wrong. Um, Sitting down is actually not something I enjoy, um, because after an hour or so, if I'm lucky, um, I'm usually in some level of discomfort and occasionally outright pain. Um, and that's what I was dealing with at this gig. Now, the right situation can be enough to take your mind off that and you get through it and don't really notice until you try to stand at the end of the night and find you're in blooming agony. But no, by this point, I was sadly all too well aware of said agony, and it was going to take something special to make me forget all about it. But instead, we entered what I call the true Prog coma section of the show, where he played all of my least favourite songs back to back to back to back. Impossible tightrope, or as I like to call it, interminable torture. Um, Two tracks in a row from Insurgents, his debut solo album that I've had since it was released and still couldn't tell you a damn thing about, other than. And then um, on from there. So it actually got to the point where I considered doing the unthinkable and leaving early. But I was in the middle of a row and it would have been awkward. And I'm British. Well, I'm not, but I've acclimatized. Um, so I try my best to grin and bear it. I couldn't even check my phone to see how much longer there might be left to go because, as Steve had requested, fair enough, no photos or video of the show, the staff at the venue were quick to pounce on anyone who so much as stuck a look at their phones. Um, and yet the whole gig is available to watch on YouTube from a audience video, apparently. Um, I haven't looked at that. I'm not going to find it to link down below. If it's still up there, you can go search for that yourself and see if I'm talking complete bollocks, as you suspect. Anyway, pain and drum sound, have I mentioned that? Aside, there were still positives. Oh, yes. I'm not a complete negative Nelly, I promise. So, of course, the musicianship. And alongside Stephen and Craig, there was the great Nick Beggs on bass, who's always great value, Adam Holzman on keys, both of whom, as was Craig, were with Stephen the last time I saw him solo, which is a full decade ago. So the newbie on guitar was Randy McStein, who of course plays on the album as well and impresses both there and live. Not as much as other guitarists I've seen in the past, but Guthrie Govan is a hard act to follow. What can you say? Um, Speaking of which, I have to tell you about that show 10 years ago. I mean, among other delights, at a time when we thought Porcupine Tree were dead and buried, and he hadn't really played much PT music solo, we got She's Moved On and Open Car. We had Routine with Nanette live on stage. And then we had Home Invasion, Regret Number 9, and Drive Home, special guest Guthrie Govan. And finale of Lazarus and the Sound of Music with special guest Gavin Harrison. Yeah, I know. That was great, wasn't it? Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is you win some, you lose some. Anyway, not a total write off, but I can only muster a 6 out of 10 from me. And yeah, when money is as tight as it is right now, that stings as badly as if it had been a 3 out of 10. Um, but hey, it's rare I'm disappointed by a gig, so when it does happen, it probably feels worse than it is. Also, I didn't get my night right because the first set of the Palladium shows had quite a few more songs in there that would have been more up my alley and less of the interminable stuff. So basically, as I say, all well booger. Anyway, that's more than enough whining from me on that. So let me know if you caught this tour and how it was for you, which night you saw, because that makes a difference. And if you haven't already seen that, do check out my highly positive overview review. That should be on one side of my head or the other at the moment, if you're not watching on a mobile device. Anyway, I'll just say thanks for joining me today and for watching, and I'll merely say bye for now, but I hope not for long.
Acting is reacting. This does not mean acting again.